Hello, everybody. I cannot tell you how deeply honored and thrilled I am to be able to speak with Henry Shukman today. I will be sending you details of his amazing biography, but we're going to plunge in. Before we do, and celebrate his absolutely amazing new book, which is a classic and a masterpiece and should be in the karmic backpack of every seeker, whatever path you're on. It's one of the books that has given me the most pleasure in the deepest sense in the last 30 years. And we're just going to be exploring some of the extraordinary themes in this book, Original Love. But Henry, let's begin by one of the extraordinary, simple, but devastatingly powerful practices that you give in this book. So if you could lead us into that spaceless space that this practice opens up, that would be a great gift to me and to everybody listening.
Andrew, thank you. Thank you so much for such a kind welcome. I've been,
It's
as
not kind. It's not kind. This is a masterpiece. It's a distilled essence of a lifetime search. And it is a book that is so important for us at this moment. You know, Richard Rohr said, I think, the most extraordinary thing about this book. He just said three lines, and Richard is lapidary, but always very clear. He said, of all the books on meditation that I've read, none has so clearly laid out the finding of love as its central project. It's also unusual for a book like this to come from the hand of a poet. It's a beautiful book, but more important, it's one we all need, and we all need it now. I certainly need it, and everybody listening, you'll find that if you buy this book, and I beg you to do so, you will find in it an endless resource of clear, humble, but very, very astute wisdom. So onward, sorry, I couldn't resist. I love what Richard said. It's such a beautiful summary of what makes this book unique and so important.
uh, well, thank you again. My humble uh, self
I'm
is
going to embarrass you
is
because I know that
leaping up.
English people are very embarrassable by compliments, which you must be empty enough to receive such fullness.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm really honored and pleased. I am pleased that it's landed with someone like you to the extent it has. Well, not someone like with you specifically. You've been a North Star in my pantheon of guides I have read but not known personally until now. From
Thank
the
you.
age of 30 or 29, was it in 1991? Whenever Hidden Journey came out,
Oh,
and also Journey to Ladakh. Oh my gosh, or Journey in Ladakh. They were formative books for me as a young English writer poet. You
when
know,
they showed you that you could get out of that refrigerator of crucifying irony and that it was allowed to be a mistake.
it was allowed.
Oh,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you. So look, what I thought yeah, I mean, there's a few guided meditations in this book, and we chatted about one before we started. So I'll go ahead and
Would you do that? That would be so. I did
yeah.
you? Can I just ask you something about this meditation? Because was it something that came to you, or was it from the tradition itself? Because it's so powerful.
No, it wasn't. I haven't come across this in the tradition itself. It was
I
more of a sort of
haven't.
just a way that I encountered a pathway to it, capital or in quotes, it. The it that is not an it. The something that is not something.
Whatever it is,
Yeah,
yes.
it's not something and it's not nothing.
Right.
It's
Asat,
not
neither sat nor asat. Yes.
exactly, exactly.
Hmm.
So let's see where this goes. At the top of this, by the way, I say try this. Like just try it. So let's all in the spirit of experimentation, let's just see how this is. So I'm going to read and I'm going to sort of pace it, so that hopefully it will sort of it will give us a taste. So come into stillness with your eyes open. Look across the space in front of you. Actually, if you're right in front of a screen, that you don't need to look straight at it, but look down a little bit and sort of notice what is before you in a receptive way. So you're not looking directly at any point. It's more like you're receiving the whole screen of sight. Keep your eyes more or less still. And now imagine that the whole field of your vision is like an illuminated stage at the front of a dark auditorium. So all this that you see contained in the perhaps somewhat sort of oval or almost egg-shaped field of vision, imagine that all of that light-filled space that you see is like a stage in a dark auditorium. Let yourself start to feel what it's like to be seeing this stage, this sort of beyond the proscenium arch, this little pocket or field of vision, while you're drifting backward, as if you're drawing back away from the stage, farther back over the rows of seats, back into the dark space behind you. Let yourself go still farther behind the last row of seats. So we're we're fully aware of this light-filled space before us, but we're also aware of the dark space behind, and we're drawing back into it. We're being pulled, gently drawn back into the dark space. Meanwhile, there's still the lit up stage, still the lit up stage of your field of sight in front of you. And now you're starting to see it floating in a great dark space. Let it be as if the stage of your sight becomes a kind of box with light illuminating it, and you are in the darkness away from it, looking at the lit box. Feel the dark space that envelops the whole area of sight and envelops you too. Feel, sense the dark space all around and behind you, while being aware of the illuminated area of your sight. Sense how wide this darkness all around you actually is. A great breadth of spacious dark to either side, maybe wider than we can ever know. Maybe it opens endlessly to either side and behind us. What would it be like to recede still farther back into that darkness, to dissolve into it? What kind of deepest rest might it offer? Is it possible? Is it possible that some part of us knows we have a deep home in that spacious darkness? As if our field of experience is wrapped, enveloped in a great space. a space without light, without qualities, and very, very present. Mm.
A deep home in that darkness. You know that the great Christian mystic Ruysbrook, whom for me is the greatest of them all, talks about the darkness in which the lovers lose themselves.
Ah, yes, yes. As we dissolve, all other also dissolves. Ah,
And all the plots and all the constructions and all the fantasies and all the illusions that prevent us from knowing viscerally beyond thought our interconnection with everything that is an emanation of that darkness, all those disappear and we are everything and nothing.
that's beautifully, beautifully put. Exactly. Exactly.
With this deep home in darkness offered to us, I just want to explore three of the very powerful themes of this book. Before I do, I want to read what is the only helpful book jacket that I've read recently, which describes this book so purely. Renowned mindfulness teacher Henry Shukman provides a way forward based on four ins of practice: mindfulness, support, absorption, and awakening. Together, they lead to deep and fulfilling meditation for practitioners at all levels. And it works. Shukman includes personal anecdotes and inspiring stories from his students that reveal how it has transformed their lives. Urgently needed, original love helps us create peace for ourselves and our times by reducing stress, anxiety, and depression, relaxing the mind and body, easing feelings of worry and regret, improving decision making and executive functioning, and awakening to our true nature, unconditional love. And I can tell you that from my own experience of this book and the absolutely radiant clarity with which it's presented, all of those claims are real. But I wanted to begin our exploration of original love, four ins on the path of awakening, by being brave enough to read out to you some of your own immaculate prose. You know something, everybody listening, there are lots of fine teachers who can't write. And Henry and I have talked about this naughtily behind the scenes. But it's so amazing when a deep realization comes together with profound literary gifts, because then the literature that's created itself is initiatory. So I hope that you have the experience that I had when I first read this beautiful passage. Long ago, I was fortunate enough to join a group visiting Mount Athos, a peninsula in northern Greece dedicated to the monastic life of the Orthodox Church. Our little party was led by a devout icon painter, Aidan Hart, at that time a novice monk who was a beautiful man to be around. For years, his practice had been the continuous recitation of the Jesus prayer, beloved of Russian Orthodoxy, and some combination of this practice and his general faith had made him radiant, as if he brought clear, refreshing daylight into any room he was in. A clear, refreshing daylight. How lovely. His own primary spiritual guide was an abbot in one of the monasteries on Athos, someone he revered as his spiritual father, and he was delighted when it turned out that we'd all be granted an audience with this august figure. The old abbot had a long silver beard, and there was a stillness about him, a deep quiet. Apart from his long hair and beard and the gold ornaments that adorned his black robes, he reminded me of some Zen masters I had met, the dark, shining clarity of his eyes and his calm, capacious presence. We met in a large room overlooking the Aegean Sea. The monastery had been built into a cliff some 1400 years earlier in its oldest parts. This ancient raftered room had been resting there high above the sea, filled with holy practice ever since. It was a lovely place, not austere, because although plain, it shone with the gold frames of icons on the walls, and the air was rich with candle wax and incense. The abbot spoke to us in his excellent, careful French. By the man's presence, I was awed and I found myself tongue-tied, able to offer only a few garbled, meager sentences about Zen. The abbot listened and paused. Then he said that Zen was too foreign. It was like a long, narrow bridge. When a shock came, the bridge would fall. I was quite young in practice and felt both shy and offended. I kept quiet and I didn't tell him what I thought, which was that far from being a long bridge, Zen was the shortest distance to my own heart. So, Henry, here you are now. Go back into that room and look into the eyes of that abbot and tell him what you know Zen has done for you and what you know from your long experience of teaching people on all paths. Practice of Zen meditation can do for those who are willing to accept its rigor and its focus.
Yes. The most important thing really is that Zen is not Zen. Zen is you yourself in the simplest possible way. It's the simplest path, except it's not really a path. It's the simplest rediscovery of yourself as you most deeply are. It's not really a journey. It's a coming back when you haven't really left. But you need to come back to realize that you never really left. That's why Zen, one of its favorite phrases is the gateless gate. Because when you go through the gate, you realize there's no gate. There's no gate to go through. But if you just say there isn't a gate, that's not, which is the truth, but then it doesn't include realizing that there's no gate, which is so important because it changes everything. Because we stop being alone. We stop being isolated and separate. To go through the gateless gate is to discover that we were never really alone and separate the way we thought for so long. And all that followed from that, all the strategies and schemes and plots and devices and pain and struggling to reduce pain and struggling with pain, being pained about having pain. All of that is actually marvelously both sort of annulled and held when we go through the gateless gate. And it's always here and there's nothing to go through. But we need to realize that. So I don't know, that's something like it, what I would try to say. And please, Abbot, Reverend Abbot, please don't believe that Zen is foreign. It may sound like it. It is, after all, a Japanese word that was once a Chinese word, Chan, and that was once an Indian, a Sanskrit word, jhana or jhana in Pali. But actually, it's just a way of labeling, what we really are.
I think he would love that reply. And one other thing you could point out to that venerable abbot is that Christian mysticism itself is at its core a vision of the no thing from which everything arises. In St. John's Gospel, and God became the Word. So out of the formless Godhead arises the Word. And Meister Eckhart is the great master of the various forms of imageless contemplation that lead to this completely life-changing experience of the nothing that is everything. He might get a little shirty about that one, but I think he probably had experienced it doing his own mantra, the Jesus mantra. So he would know that Zen is the way that millions of people beyond dogma, beyond religion, can experience this directly for themselves as their essential non-self.
Yes, yes, beautiful. It's marvelous how I love that out of nothing came the word. I love that.
Mm.
There's a there's a actually, in Zen, there's the use of strange little koans, little phrases that can help shift and nudge and cajole and coax us over the edge. And one of the most much used one of the most used ones is the little koan not. It's actually mu in Japanese, but it means not. It just means not. And we just meditate in, with, on that tiny little syllable, not. Not. We don't really think about its meaning. We just bring it in now and then to our practice. And it can become all things. It can show us that one tiny syllable can be as much as all things, because it is exactly cognate, it is part of, it is one with, and it comes from the no thing.
In Advaita Vedanta, they have this extraordinary meditation when they employ neti neti, and
Yes.
which is the same in a different tradition. And how they explain it, and I've practiced it for many years, is that whatever you come up with the mind, it's not that.
Yes. Yes.
And if your most glorious confabulation of thought is not, so it is an endless piercing through every dogma, every construction to arrive at the placeless place of immediate, visceral, passionate, compassionate experience, isn't it?
It is exactly, because we're so used to and habituated and conditioned toward constructing understandings. And even if we're blessed and graced with a moment of releasing and discovering our inseparability, very commonly within a few maybe days or weeks or hours or months, it
5
depends,
minutes.
5 minutes, we're reconstructing. Oh, now I understand.
Yes, now
Actually,
I
yeah,
understand. The very
exactly,
purpose of the experience is to dissolve the very thing that then tries to encapsulate the experience.
exactly.
Not.
Not this, not this. Moo, moo, moo.
And what's so beautiful about that meditation is that you could conceive of it, and people have conceived of it as a negative meditation. It's not a negative
No,
meditation. It's the most expansive imaginable
exactly.
meditation that leads to the most expansive imaginable realization.
That's
And I
exactly
just
right.
hope that you wouldn't mind me indulging myself and reading to you what you might have read to the abbot
Mm.
had I translated it for you. which I have done. So it's Hadovich, and Hadovich at the last period of her life. Hadovich was a beginner who lived in the 13th century. Her work was lost for 6 centuries. I've spent 3 years of my life trying to bring her back, and now she's available. And she wrote these extraordinary poems about what she called noble clarity, which is exactly what arises at the end or through the process of the knot. Noble clarity manifests as it pleases. Quest, intention, reason are of no use here. There are things that must be banished to remain in the interior in a naked silence, pure, without will. This is how it is received. The nobility human words could never express with that consciousness that springs ever fresh from its intact source. In this immensity, you are led to that is endless, that you can never return to, neither intelligence nor intuition can put down anchor. Show any curiosity for the external world, you lose the sense of this and are scattered. It is a noble zeal that makes you listen at all moments to the interior voice. Accept what happens, cold and hot, sweet and bitter. Do not be angry at insult or bitter at derision. To acquire this consciousness and receive this light, you must be led forward and be vastly dilated by the force of love. And what's so beautiful about that poem, why I chose it, is that it comes back to the title that you chose, which was an extremely original title for a book on Zen, as Rule points out, original love. I want now to go to the second potential radical and gorgeous part of your book, and that is that one of the great helpful and profoundly revealing parts of this book is Henry's deep understanding of the intricate, mysterious, and ultimately amazing interconnection between our traumas, our heartbreaks, and our potential awakening. How they arise together. And I would love you to just give us a sketch of the traumas that led you in your initial search and throughout your life, and how doing Zen helped you discover this amazing insight.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like it's sort of the drive for healing, is actually some facet of awakening already that's showing itself as the yearning to come back to what is not broken. But it doesn't really know. I never knew how broken I was until the moments when a healing showed itself. And then I'd realize, oh wow, I've been so off track. Or wow, that thing has been with me so long. That was kind of misdirected in some way, but really it was just a pain. It was just a hurt, unacknowledged. So I grew up with very severe eczema. I know a lot of people have eczema and it doesn't, but I had it very, very severely. I was hospitalized for it a number of times in my childhood. It began when I was 6 months old, when my mother left me for 10 days. And when she came back, and that was how I was weaned. And when she came back, I was covered from, scalp to toe in eczema. And it was a long, hard process. I mean, it's intensely itchy. It was like, I mean, I actually just recently I had a couple of mosquito bites, I was on the East Coast in Washington, and there were mosquitoes. And, it's like, man, this thing is itchy. And then it came back to me what it was like to be covered in really raging itch. It was so much stronger than a
Not
mosquito.
just the itch, though, is it? It's a sense of being disfigured at the very moment when you're coming into your sexuality. You want to be attractive, you want to be part of the
Yeah.
wild dance of testosterone, and you want to enter the great carnival of life. And then to be disfigured like that is a terrible affliction, isn't it? Especially at that age.
I know it was bitter in puberty and adolescence. It really was hands and face and neck and elbows and legs. It was very, 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 very difficult. And I had a strange blessed relief from it for 6 months when I left Oxford, where I grew up, when my parents were academics. And I went to Argentina and worked on a ranch. My dad had a colleague at his college from Argentina who found a job for me and a friend, actually, on this ranch of his in Argentina. So we worked there for several months, and then we backpacked, and we had this extraordinary time. I mean, it was the most mind-blowing time of discovery and expansion, and I wrote my first book actually during those months, and
Ah,
and 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 my eczema healed. Far from home, different climate, different diet, various factors, and being profoundly creative in a way that I'd always wanted to be. It was very sort of fulfilling time. And towards the end of that time, I was I was on my own on a beach, watching the sun lower towards the horizon, and I suddenly had a moment of dissolution where I vanished, and all there was what I was seeing, and I became part of the scene before me in a way that I'd never known was possible, of course, but also part of the whole universe. And I felt I could have moved, I could have touched the furthest corner of the cosmos with my fingertip, and that my nose was pressing. I remember this when I came out of it, my nose was pressing against the beginning of time. And I stone cold sober, and I had no interest, curiosity even. So
that's so perfect, isn't it?
it came out of nowhere, and I found
Yeah,
I was,
literally.
yeah, actually, literally, exactly. And I felt I'd just discovered that I was nothing but the universe. And when I sort of reconstituted as a witnessing presence, you know, uh, a few minutes later or whatever it was, on this beautiful beach with this beautiful sunset unfolding, I felt like my life was completely fulfilled now because of what I just found. It would be fine.
Yes,
I could die then and there because it had been completely fulfilled, and that in a way I had been reclaimed by an immemorial love, and that was an important part of it. And actually, a few weeks later, I flew back home, and I was so open that all the childhood trauma that
mhm,
I had kind of compartmentalized and suppressed and adapted so that I didn't have to feel through my childhood, all the adaptations were gone. And so the natural thing happened as soon as I got home, which was that I felt all that trauma,
exactly.
but I had no resources really. I just wasn't ready, and it was overwhelming. And I had a difficult few years. I sort of limped through college into a PhD program that I wasn't really sure I wanted to be in. And I was very unhappy. I got lucky and I started meditating. I did TM for a few years. I had a couple of friends who did it and who encouraged it. And I began, a journey of healing. And I did some therapy, and I was lucky. I found a little therapy group of 20 somethings led by a maverick, wild Californian renegade
It's like
therapist.
nothing to wife.
So I sort of got lucky that I did find the trail, the little breadcrumbs of a path of healing that, I couldn't have said I really needed it. I was just miserable, and I thought that's the way life was, and I discovered the secret of life, and I'd lost it, and there was no further redemption. I felt like I'd been allowed out of the gates of hell, and I'd stumbled foolishly back in, and the gates had clanged shut and would never let me out again. That's how I felt when I came home. And that, gradually it dawned on me that I might not have the whole picture, you know.
Very surprising for an English person, isn't it? We're taught how to fake the whole picture, even if we don't have it. But
Yes.
what I want to explore
Mm.
is the relationship between the eczema and the revelation. And I
Yeah.
want to propose something and see if it makes any sense to you. In meditating on this and reading your wonderful autobiography of Blade of Grass and, of course, Original Love, I wonder if that experience of being annihilated, effaced by the eczema, drove you very deep into your interior because it was the only place you could survive what was afflicting you. And although initially that driving into your interior might have been filled with pain and bitterness and grief at what was happening to your body, it laid the ground for the kind of focus on the inmost self that couldn't be effaced and annihilated by the eczema to start evolving.
Yeah. That's beautiful. And I think that's probably
Does that ring true to you?
yeah, it does. It does. I think it's probably true. When I years later I did jhana practice, which is a specific Buddhist Theravada
Absolutely.
methodology, and I found when I started doing it, immediately I went into the first three jhanas, and I knew them. I knew them very well from my childhood. They were a thing that I'd sometimes gone into when the
Exactly,
eczema was
because you
particularly bad.
learned it out of desperation.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And so I think probably when that spontaneous awakening happened when I was 19, I'd probably been inadvertently kind of practicing before then
Well,
without
you were
knowing it.
doing the not because you were not the eczema.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
eczema was happening to you and tormenting your life. But
yes.
through that deep plunge into your interior, you discovered that that was not the essence.
Exactly, exactly, exactly. And it had never been so. I mean, it was a decisive moment then because it really came fully into awareness. It exploded into consciousness. It wasn't just something I'd learned how to do,
Right.
but
And nothing that you've
unwittingly.
been prepared for conceptually either, because you hadn't been reading mystical texts
No,
necessarily.
no.
It exploded. It
It
happened.
exploded. So,
Yes.
in fact, the fact that I knew nothing about that kind of capacity of us humans made it all the more powerful because I was just
Yes.
like, what is this? What is this? Oh my gosh. And it just kept going deeper and deeper. And it's
Yes.
the whole universe is right here. Every part of it is here. And I'm not what I thought, and, and,
It's
and
still inside you, isn't it? I mean,
it totally is.
it's
Yeah.
totally, it's the, but
So,
what was so beautiful listening to you describe it is that I suddenly understood for myself why teaching and writing has been so important for you after this experience. Because you never want anybody else to go through the confusion and bewilderment that you had to go through to find a path that could contain something so immense,
that is
either in the suffering or in the explosive new understanding.
That's exactly right. I don't want anybody to go through what I went through.
Me
No,
too. Yeah.
that's
It's
exactly right.
really the central theme of both of our lives in different ways, but mutually interrelated. Because when we were starting, it was so difficult to find any help. So if
Exactly.
you had amazing revelations, you thought, you were crazy, or other people thought you were crazy. And then you had no knowledge of how those revelations would then stir up everything that needed to be healed. So you felt that you'd failed, that you'd lost them. So it made the whole process of awakening infinitely more difficult than it needs to be, although it always has great difficulties.
That's right. That's right. That's exactly right. It's like not sort of trying to find a path when you don't know who
That
or
there is
what
a
it is
path,
that's
or that there is a goal, or that there
exactly,
yes.
exactly, exactly. And then, when I started meditating, I got no sense that what TM was offering had anything to do with that moment of explosive awakening. None at all.
Sweet.
But
You
but
didn't.
but when I but
They never talked about it.
they talked a little bit in an abstract way about other
Brahman
levels of
and
consciousness, but it didn't correspond, it didn't click with me at all that they were talking about something like what I'd experienced. It was much more about stress reduction and sleeping better, paying off your sleep debt. And then I just heard, 5 years later or so, I heard a line of Dogen.
ah,
Dogen, the Zen monk,
yeah, the
scholar,
greatest, the
poet,
strangest, the most mysterious of
strangest.
all. Yeah.
But he,
Anybody who claims to understand Dogen is lying unless they are
yes,
completely
yes,
you get glimpses, don't you, with Dogen?
you get little glimpses. And there was a part that a friend read to me, and no, I didn't understand a word of it. But I suddenly realized a couple of days later, while I was doing some washing up at the sink, this was in New Mexico, by the way, where I am now, I suddenly realized that he must have been talking from that experience that I'd
Exactly.
had when I was 19. Whatever it
It
meant, I
just
could not
came.
stop.
It came when you were washing dishes.
Yes, yeah. And then I
Perfect.
thought, I got to try Zen. I got to try Zen. And I was kind of right. They knew about it. Not only did they know about it, but it was central to the project. They knew that you could go further. Actually, they knew that it was real and that there was a path beyond it, even, which is not really, it has no path, but we as a human have a path that whereby we're healing, and we're saturating in it and healing more and saturating in it more until finally everything can fall away, and then we're freed, something like that.
I love that. Can I just read to you these 4 paragraphs because I find them absolutely not only brilliant but deeply helpful for all of us going through the massive trauma of this dying rebirth process that is happening so terrifyingly in the world. Because to go back to the theme of our talk, this section, it's truly the interrelation between trauma and awakening. Seen from one side, we're reeling with horror. Seen from the side of growing awakening, the growing horror is a massive, thrilling opportunity for us to do what you did, go deep within to find what the horror cannot destroy, and then be empowered from that extraordinary experience to relate to other beings of all kinds in the horror, to be of true, humble, radiant help.
Beautifully
So,
put.
may I read this to
Yeah.
you? It's such a joy to read this to you. I love this. I'd grown up traumatized by my skin. Life had been a scary place. But I had also had inklings of a place of freedom, peace, and love. The age of 19, I'd leaped over a whole lot of middle ground and found my intrinsic awakened nature. But I had a lot of backfilling to do. And the jhana states, the states of meditation, helped with that. Had I found some peace in jhana as a child because the misery and despair of severe eczema had driven me to search for inner relief? Somehow, I had been approximately entering the first 3 jhanas as a boy, inexpertly and randomly. had those experiences set me up for the awakening I underwent at the age of 19? Possibly. Yet at the same time, the wounds that eczema inflicted on the psyche remained unhealed. And I therefore had to revisit them through therapy of different kinds. And throughout the years, I'd been backtracking through the middle ground. You state that in a kind of dualistic opposition, and then you go into this completely mind-boggling but very revealing paragraph, which I think is the key to the mystical path and to our terrifying possibility in this crisis. Or were trauma and awakening connected? They wanted to dance together. The wound and the cure, the imprisonment and dysfunction and the liberation, were they as separate and contradictory as they seemed? Or did they somehow arise together? Were they part of one whole, part of one greater love? I think everybody should meditate on that paragraph right now, because if you continue to see the horror and the violence and the madness as your enemy and as something that defeats you, you will never be graced the realization that the trauma and the horror are allowed to happen by the mysterious intelligence of love to help us get over the addiction to illusions that has caused that horror and discover something within us that will empower us immeasurably and help us rebuild the world and rebirth humanity and make a wholly new experience available for everyone. So for me, the extremity of the trauma we're living is one side of love's action, because it's there to drive us into this discovery, which will birth us into the next quantum level of our evolution and enable us to accomplish through enlightened awareness what we cannot even yet imagine.
Oh,
And you know that from the truth of your own life. I know that from the truth of my own life. And I know that the truth of our lives is not just our lives, it's the truth of this experience. But I would love for you to talk about these sentences: the wound and the cure, the imprisonment and dysfunction and the liberation. Were they as separate and contradictory as they seemed?
oh, yes, yes, yes.
Please
Isn't,
explore that. If
yeah,
I
I mean,
love that. It's so liberating
uh,
when you begin to comprehend that through grace.
yes, and it is through grace, because it's a little bit of a leap. It's a tiny bit of a surrender that opens up a greater love that simply encompasses both. And that the separation from that love is a great pain. It's a great pain and a great distress, but it's only the distress of being separated from it. And actually, when we find it, we realize that was another expression of the love anyway.
Yes.
What if there's no hurt without love? There's no love without hurt, and and hurt is just another face of love. And what if
Pure,
there's, yeah,
sorry, but I'm so sorry. I thought, yeah.
go
Pure
ahead.
Lindo was on a balcony once, and he was in his 60s, so very grand and awake. And a scorpion bit him. And if you've ever been bitten by a scorpion, it's absolute agony. And instead of reacting, he said, "Oh, my beloved, my beloved, my beloved." And he went into an even deeper, concentrated. He had realized the unity, the secret unity of opposites in the no thing.
Yes, yes, yes. And aren't we always being invited to more and more heart opening, which might mean more and more heartbreak? That as long as the heart sort of has a limit it must break. And when it breaks, even a crack, it's more open. And when it's
Yes.
more open, it's more whole. And so, heartbreak that we so commonly sort of want to shrink from and feel overwhelmed by at times. And no, 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 please, not that. But actually, heartbreak that comes in so many forms and it's always really here. It's always here. And
Course, my God, it's all around us in the agony of what's happening in samsara. It's
exactly,
Gaza, it's
exactly.
animal cruelty, it's racism, it's
Yeah.
everywhere. And
Yes.
when you awaken, you see and feel that at a level that you have never seen and felt it before.
Yes, exactly. And it's a training in how does the heart just stay broken and we
Broken,
serve and
open.
we yes, exactly. It's basically open.
But
Exactly.
that is the truth of truths. But the danger for so many people is that they don't know that,
Yes.
because nobody has explained from a realization of that to them. So they're terrified of heartbreak. And when heartbreak comes,
Yes.
they choose to medicate it or to deny it or to suppress it or to demonize it or to
Yes.
use it as a way for blaming your parents for having caused all this. It goes on and on, the strategies of not using that sacred alchemy. So one of the wonderful parts of this book is this, you're very subtle and actually relentless coming back to these themes to help people see and feel and intuit that heartbreak is not a failure, it's not a limitation, it's an invitation from the mystery of the universe to open your heart more, to run on the knife, if you like, of heartbreak so that it can open your heart more. Kabir says in one of his poems, he says, I am God's assassin. And I am waiting for you in the dark alley of abandoned love. For when finally you are brave enough to run onto my knife. And that's a very extreme and gorgeous statement of it, but making it practical. If you use what's happening in our world at this moment as an excuse to shut down or to vote Republican or to go fascist or any of the other possibilities that are now here, you're wasting one of the supreme opportunities that human beings have ever been given.
Yes.
Because each catastrophe is an invitation to find that love in an ever more spacious and generous and bathing way. And if you have a technique, a simple, strong technique like Zen available to you, it will emerge, that technique, as the most salvational, redemptive, transformative, imaginable way of living. And
Yes.
it will
Yes.
only get wider, the heart.
Yes. 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 Beautifully put. It's like run onto the sword of now. Let now, in all its beauty and horror, pierce your heart. Let it, let it, let it. The thing that you least want, let it undo you.
That's true. It was so, when you were speaking, I was remembering something that Bede, my great teacher, once said to me, Bede Griffiths, he said, when somebody hurts you very badly, the first thing that you should do is to pray for their liberation. Pray that the pain that you're feeling can be offered up to the universe to bless and liberate the person who has caused that pain. And for many years, I thought, I that that may be all right for a great saint, but it's certain. And then one day the pain was so great because somebody had hurt me so badly that I thought, well, perhaps the old guy was right. So I sat down and I did that practice, and the practice is overwhelming. because what it does is liberate you from all the constructions of your full self. And it starts to dissolve the very pain itself. And then you come to the bizarre realization, which is directly in your book, that maybe through the mystery of karma and the mystery of grace, that horror that you had to go through was the most beautiful imaginable grace, because it enabled you to discover the power of unconditional original love inside you, power that can not only forgive your enemy but bless your enemy, because without them you would never have discovered this.
Exactly.
Isn't
Exactly.
that amazing?
That is just so, it's a wonderful mystery of love, of real, true, incontrovertible. I mean, the love that cannot be daunted or touched or stained in any way. The real love of this very moment, of this universe, the love we're talking about is it's sort of untouchable. Zen has these phrases, unbesmirchable. You know, it's
Unbesmirchable.
it can't be tainted in any way, and it always knows what is it because it doesn't know it consciously, but it can't stop producing the unfolding of reality, of actual reality, rather than any human idea of reality. And so that's and I,
Yes.
and so it has to break human ideas of reality
Yes.
and
And
show
that's
us.
in a sense the path, in Sufism, they say La ilaha illallah, there is no God but God. Sufi masters say that the whole first part, La ilaha, is about getting rid of all the concepts that prevent you from being open to the unknowable mystery just as it is. So the
Yes,
path itself is full of rigors and disappointments and bewilderments and shatterings, but they're all revealed towards the end as the work of a love that has been fashioning you into a beauty that you could never imagine you possessed. There's a
exactly.
great Christian mystic who talks about this, de Caussade. He says that the dark night experience, which is the one that we're in, is like being a lump of stone and having what it looks like a crazy sculptor coming towards you with a chisel, chiseling what seems to be completely arbitrarily and hurtful and painful and dreadful. You lose this, you lose this, you lose this, you lose this, you're completely bewildered. But when time is right, the sculptor lowers a mirror and you see, oh, despite myself, I got fashioned through the unknowable workings of the mystery into this being who can stand in the
The,
depths of essential truth.
yes. Oh,
Isn't that amazing?
that's so beautiful. That's so beautiful.
But it requires something that is not deeply known in our spiritual world. And this is something I would love to talk to you at great length about, because unless you know that secret interrelationship between trauma and awakening, and unless also you're prepared to go through those shatterings while knowing what they are, but you never completely know what's coming, and you always, always are shattered. You have to be for it to work.
Yes.
Unless you're prepared to be brave enough to accept that, nothing very substantial can be revealed to you.
Yes, yes. And maybe we always have, there's part of us that is already ready for that. And
Yes.
we may not believe it. And it's just trusting. It's a wild trust.
Wild trust in the wild heart.
Exactly.
You're right.
Exactly. Exactly. So yeah, it's so beautiful to discover what these initiatory experiences can call forth that we didn't know we had.
How could we?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
How could we? I had a friend recently ask me, well, you say I should go to India. Well, what's India going to give me? And I was completely silent. I said, what is India going to give you? if I put it into words, you'd have an idea, and that would ruin the experience. You'd be shopping instead of dancing with it.
Yes.
I'd
Yes.
love to, in this last part, I would love to focus on the great revelation that you had at 19 and also has been recently in the last 10 years, tremendously enhanced by all that you've been through. And you described that wonderfully in Original Love. The initial experience happens in ignorance. This experience that happened to you in the last 10 years happened in full consciousness, in full awareness of what it is. And that is so wonderful that they're linked like that. And the journey connects them, obviously. But
Yes.
what is the true relationship between the realization of this vast nothing, this vast emptiness, this darkness that is manifesting everything, this nothing that is impregnating the whole of reality and manifesting the whole of reality? What's the relationship between that experience and radical, wise action of service in the world? Because as you well know, and it's written in the Zen text and in the Tibetan Buddhist text, there's always been a tendency in Buddhism to space out into the emptiness, and that this has been warned against by the great mystics of Buddhism because it's such a seductive temptation to
Yes.
say
Yes.
it's all nothing, it doesn't exist, it's all illusion, it's fantasy. All I have to do is to stay in this fabulous state as long as possible and
Yes.
occasionally radiate a smile or two to someone. And that cannot be
No.
supreme wisdom.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it certainly doesn't resonate with the great mystical discoveries of all of the traditions. So, what
Yes.
is your way of reconciling and marrying the
Ah.
seeming
Okay.
opposites of realization of emptiness and utter focus right now on the pain of the world and what you can do for the world?
That's a beautiful invitation. Thank you. I mean, first of all, there are a few things bubbling up. One is that to truly realize emptiness, you realize that there's nothing there. There's nothing here. So there's nothing to attach to. So to really go through it, you can't really be attached to it. If you could certainly be attached to a memory of it, an idea of it, some sense of it, but you know that's not it. And I think the deep Zen
Not,
experience that they call it knocking out the bottom of the bucket is
yeah,
knocking out all the ideas about emptiness and to really encounter truly no thing. And then you're freed. And then you know that there's no point trying to stay in that experience because it's everywhere. And it's
right,
but it's all but when I say it's everywhere, not meaning everything's empty. Wherever you go, you can't leave it. You know, so there's no need
yes,
to be attached to it.
yeah,
You know,
yes.
and you realize that
You need to
this
be
is
attuned to it,
it.
but not attached to it, isn't it? Attuned, but
Exactly.
not attached.
That's right. There's no point being attached to it because the whole point is it's generating, giving, being everything. So, that's why the act of picking up a cup of tea is it. This is actually it.
Right.
Ultimate reality
Stroking your
is
cat
this.
is
It's
making love to the entire universe. Yes.
exactly, exactly. And that's the beginning of the later phase of Zen, really, is when you've actually landed, you've blasted through the heart of the boson or the muon or the gluon or something. You've gone through the smallest possible thing there ever could be. You've gone through it. And now you're actually born. You're truly alive for the first time, really. And you and this moment, it's just this. There's a great
Yes.
Zen master, Yamada Cohen, in the 20th century. He said, he had he's celebrated as having particularly deep awakening. He said, heaven and earth collapsed and were reduced to dust. All my karmic sins were extinguished as if in a bolt of lightning. Clearly, I have seen no person, no Buddha, no thing. And what is it, after all? Nothing special. Just this. Just this. I love it. But to come back to your point, so in other
I
words,
love that. It's the perpetual joy of Zen, isn't it? It's the perpetual challenge and the perpetual revelation of Zen. That's what makes Zen so crucial for everyone's path, I believe.
well, it has its shadows too, but let's
Yes.
but you know, it's that point that you don't need to hang out in some exalted experience at all.
No.
Of course you don't. 'Cause the whole point is that it's all this, you know, and you know,
That's what
and
nothing does. It births everything. So
exactly, exactly, it's
it's
constantly.
impregnating everything. Yes.
That's another meaning of original love. It's originating. It's the love that originates all this.
Right.
You know, right now, always producing, giving, infinitely generous, in limitless capacity of
And you've
generosity.
said the word generous, and I think that gets to the real, perhaps the last thing we can talk about, which is when we talked about this when we were chatting and changing, we talked about how essential the role of the Bodhisattva vow is at, for the core of Zen, because the Bodhisattva vow prevents that kind of spacing out into the experience. And the whole point of being birthed into the experience is to make you an agent of generosity and compassion in a world that's dying
I know, yeah,
of,
yeah.
in a famine of both.
Yes. And it's like you could look at the world and say, how can I? What's the point? The problems are too big. What can I do? And there's a Zen parable. You might have heard of a little bird during a forest fire. This little bird keeps flying to a lake, getting a drop of water and flying back and dropping the drop of water from its beak onto the fire and back and forth. And some of the other animals stop and say, what are you doing? And say, well, I'm doing what I can. And actually, for each of us, that I think is what matters, is that our heart, I mean, it's exactly as you've been saying, that rather than being overwhelmed and compressed back into contractive self that can't function or is overwhelmed, and actually the open heart does something, because actually what else is there to do than something, you know, just whatever. There's one old Zen master, he says, always just one positive step toward the good is enough, you know. And actually, you know, we can look, of course we need systemic change, of course we do, and of course
Oh,
we all
yes.
need this individual personal change as well. We all are needed, but we every moment, if our heart is open, it and compassion energizes us. It actually impels action, you know. And
Don't you think it's even potentially more than that? It's that the distinction between being and doing is eliminated. And you realize beyond thought that by being in a state of original love and radiating it, even if you're just at your kitchen table with your cat purring in front of you, that has a momentous subtle effect on the whole of reality, because you're dancing with it, and the effects of that radiate out in ways that you will never know. Perhaps you'll know when you cross over, perhaps that will be revealed to you. But I
yes,
have known people, and I'm sure you have known people, who lived incredibly simple, humble lives. Yet the more you knew them, the more powerful they became, and the more you realized that in some way you could never explain, they're just being in that state and relating to everybody from that state was having an extraordinary, mysterious ripple effect through their entire world and the universe. Do you believe
yes,
that? Do you
I,
think that?
I do, because I think we sort of we misconstrue our relationship with the world, our
Yes.
relationship with the universe, you know. And I think the universe wants us to realize this.
Yes.
And when
And
we
wants us to
do,
dance with it, and wants us to play with it, and wants us most of all to be filled with the joy of original love, so
exactly.
that we can be its agent of spreading that joy through both our prayer and our being and the doing that arises effortlessly from being.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. Exactly. As we just, it's like a spring, a wellspring that just keeps pouring forth. It's doing it all around us and it's doing it within us. We are open to this, that que bien sé yo la fuente que corre, aunque es de noche, you
In the
know.
dark of
In
oh,
the
the
darkest
unseen
night,
spring in the
I know
dark
that.
of night of San Juan. That's it.
Exactly, exactly. The spring, the crystal stream is still flowing. And man, just to know that, I mean, to know it, to feel it, to
And to
experience it.
attune yourself to it through deep, humble practice, continual, humble practice.
Yes,
Because
yes,
you
yes.
can know it, even you know this, you can have massive realizations, but the ego, the false self, the hectic nature of modern life, etc., can divorce you from them. So that's
Yes,
why practice is so essential. And one of the tremendous strengths of Zen
yeah.
is that there's no time when you're not practicing in Zen. You don't get to a state where you can just loll about.
No,
The Zen
exactly.
masters are doing their practice with an even greater focus because they know what it makes possible.
Yes, yes, that's beautifully put. And there's like, yeah, great, great revelatory experience. Go and sit. Uh, Torment, my partner's just left me. Go and sit. It's just a continuum. It's like a metronome. Go and sit, go and sit, go and sit, go and sit. And actually, there's immense compassion in that. And
Oh,
there's
God.
such deep human understanding in that. Understanding of the human heart and mind and soul. It's just that steady return, return, return. No matter what triumphs and tragedies unfold. No,
Didn't Dogen actually say that enlightenment is Zazen?
he did. He
There's
did.
no separation
There's
from
no
the
separate.
act of sitting, however much in pain you are and however wild your thoughts.
Yeah.
That itself is the foundation of enlightenment.
Yes. 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 He did indeed say that. And I always think I sometimes say to people, that's all very well for him, because he
But it's
realized it.
something that
But
we all can experience, isn't it?
it
It's
is
you've
actually true.
experienced it, I've experienced it.
Yes.
We know that
Yes.
it's true.
It's actually
And
true.
it's the greatest revelation of life. And it's not just the great experiences that are the revelation, it's the fact that we have tools to attune ourselves to the deepest richness of those realizations so they can be integrated progressively into mind, heart, soul, and at last body. It's
Yes.
amazing.
Yes. 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 Exactly.
We could go on, but this has been a gorgeous conversation, and I'm so, so grateful that we could have it, Henry. And I just want to say to everybody once again, look, original love. Please, please get this absolutely wonderful book. It's been published by Papa One, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's been out for a couple of months. So you can't be amongst the first to taste it, but you can be amongst the second. Don't miss this. You've seen him, you've been with him. Don't miss the extraordinary and beautiful and practical and holy wisdom of this truly indispensable book. Thank you,
Oh,
everybody. Thank you, Henry.
Andrew, thank you so much. It's a huge honor and delight and joy to get this time with you. Ah,
We must do this again on multiple levels,
I'd love
in
to.
all realms. I love you, Henry. Thank you
I love
so much.
I love you too, and thank you.